This is a video that I've been thinking about doing for about, I'd say probably 5 to 7 years. And the reason being, for those of y'all that's been following me for a minute, you know that I was raised in Indianapolis, Indiana. I went to North Central High School, which is one of, if not the biggest feeder into Indiana University, Bloomington. And so being inside of the basketball community, growing up and graduating high school in 2002, that time in which I did, understanding what Bob Knight's relationship was like with the state of Indiana, me being a kid in the 90s and 2000s playing basketball in that state, I understand what Indiana basketball means to the state of Indiana and to the people that go to IU, because I'm an IU alum. So I 100% get this. And I'm able to see it from an objective point of view because I work in basketball. I'm not punch drunk on the memory of Robert Montgomery Knight. And so every time something happens, I want to say something. And I've been on Twitter and I said some stuff, but I feel like there needs to be a video dedicated that lives in perpetuity on my YouTube channel about the problem with Indiana basketball, because these problems are evergreen. They're not just right now. They're not just with Coach Woodson. They're going to be here forever. And I'm going to give y'all the reasons why.
My ducks, my swans, welcome to the pond.
Living in yesteryear. For those of y'all that are born, I don't know, I'm 40 now. I just turned 40, which sounds crazy to even say. So for those of y'all that's born in the 2000s, you was born in the year 2000, that means you're 24 years old. If you were born in the year 2000, you really don't understand what Indiana basketball was like in the 1900s. You don't understand what Bob Knight meant in the 70s and the 80s to college basketball and to coaching as a whole. When you talk about Kentucky, when you talk about UConn, when you talk about Duke, Indiana basketball would fit into one of what those schools are today. That's what Indiana basketball was back then. And they won a lot of national championships. We got 5 national championships total. 1940, 1953, 1976, 1981, and 1987. And we probably should have got one in 1975, but Scott May broke his arm. You want to go down that rabbit hole, go ahead and YouTube that. Scott May is Sean May's dad, by the way. So Indiana basketball is what the mainstream media calls a blue blood. And it makes sense. And these expectations have continued on even though Coach Knight has left. Every Indiana fan needs to twist their brain and change their brain and recalibrate and understand that the Indiana basketball brand is not what it once was. We have not won a national championship since 1987. We're coming up on 40 years. The players that we're recruiting right now, they have no idea who Bob Knight is. They have no idea who Quinn Buckner is. They have no idea who Scott May is, Steve Alford is. Some of them don't even know who Isaiah Thomas is. And there are some of them who know who Isaiah Thomas is, and they have no idea that he won a national championship at IU. The brand is terrible. Nike runs basketball today. The last time we went to a Final Four in 2002, Indiana was a basketball school. Since then, we have been aligned with Adidas, directly because of Indiana Elite, a elite AAU program that feeds right into IU. But what has Indiana Elite really done? Who have they really gave us? Yogi Ferrell, Cody Zeller, you want to talk about Hannah Perea? You want to talk about Peter Yerkin? We can go down the list, on down the line. IU is being held hostage by its relationship with Indiana Elite and getting all this money from Adidas when Nike EYBL has a relationship with the NBA. Those games are being shown on ESPN. Nike is the premier athletic apparel company for anything that has to do with basketball. Yet IU continues to want to be aligned with Adidas, which makes our brand look like crap. Our jerseys are trash. Those pinstripe pants are old and corny. We need to memorialize that with the entire Bob Knight era. The fact that the players still ain't got their names on the back of their jerseys is something that shows us that we are still living in yesteryear. Players today are representing their families. I know for a lot of you IU fans who are watching this, you feel like they should be grateful that they're getting their education paid for. They are, but they're worth a lot more than that scholarship now, as we can see with NIL. And that name on the front is not ever going to be more loyal than that name that's on the back. Who are we to tell kids that they cannot represent their families when they play for Indiana University? And you combine all that with the fact that we really don't have any elite NBA players and the brand that IU basketball has, it just isn't sexy. And we got to come to that realization. Number 2, watered down in-state talent. When I was growing up, when the Street and Smith rankings came out, which is the equivalent of like ESPN's high school rankings or whatever, when Athlon Sports, when USA Today, when they were ranking the best players in America, they would always have players in New York. That's the number 1 media market. They would always have players in LA. That's the number 2 media market. They would always have players in Chicago. That's number 3 media market. They would go to North Carolina and Florida and Texas and Arizona. The DMV area. These places where there's a lot of people, but there's also traditionally been a lot of basketball talent. But every single year, no matter what year it was, when they were ranking the players in the top 10, in the top 15, there was always somebody from Indiana. Whether they were from Indianapolis, whether they were from Gary, from Fort Wayne, from Evansville, there was always an elite, if not multiple elite recruits that were from the state of Indiana. So Bob Knight made this an emphasis to make sure that we are going to get in-state kids. Purdue has even built their entire basketball brand, their one national championship game, on the fact that they're going to get elite in-state kids, and they used to always recruit Gary like crazy. That doesn't exist anymore. And the reason it doesn't exist anymore is because Bob Knight was a basketball patriarch. So what that mean? That means that Bob Knight was posted up in Bloomington for, 30, 40 plus years? So when his players would come play for him, and he made sure his players graduated, when they moved on to the next aspect of their lives, when they needed to come back and they needed help getting a job or needed, to start a business, it made sense for them to come back to Indiana, because not only were they folk heroes from their hometown because they played at IU, they also had a relationship with Coach Knight, which would allow them social currency to do whatever it is that they want to do. So now you have these elite talented basketball players who played D1 or played in the Euro League or played in the NBA for a few years, coming back to Indiana, raising their family, raising their kids, producing offspring that's also elite talent. And it was just a cycle that kept on going. Once Coach Knight got fired, we no longer had a basketball patriarch. It's been just a revolving door of stepdaddy after stepdaddy after stepdaddy after stepdaddy. So what happens when it's a revolving door with a bunch of stepdaddies? People start living all over the world because they want to stay away from their homeland. So when you look at the talent that's in Indiana right now, how many of those dudes' parents were from Indiana, were raised in Indiana, went to school in Indiana? Probably not a lot. If you are an elite basketball player today, when you're done playing, not only are you making a whole lot more money than those dudes made back then, but you're probably gonna go live in New York, LA, DC, Chicago, Atlanta, Miami, Houston, Dallas, Phoenix. You're not gonna come back to Indianapolis. You're not gonna move back to Gary. So because our talent is so watered down in the state, that is not a formidable recruiting strategy anymore. The Mr. Basketballs of today in the state of Indiana are nothing in comparison to the Mr. Basketballs of yesteryear. If you want to have a competitive team that's going to get a lot of TV games, you're going to have to dominate outside of the state of Indiana when it comes to recruiting. And number 3, unrealistic expectations when it comes to winning. We haven't won a national championship in 40 years, almost 40 years, 1987. Yet, anytime there's an Indiana team that looks like they might be able to make some noise in the tournament, Indiana fans are like, if it ain't a Final Four, the season's a failure. These are unrealistic expectations. You know how hard it is to win a national championship? We should know. We ain't won one since the 80s. So why do you still have this mentality that if we have a good team, they gotta win the Natty? They got to get to the championship game. They got to get to the Final Four. They got to get to the Elite Eight. Having a respectable college basketball program that consistently gets the Sweet 16 is going to lay the foundation for a team that we know we're going to the Sweet 16 every year. That one season where the second weekend of the tournament is clicking, okay, boom, that's our Final Four team. And we get to the Final Four, then anything can happen. But when we start consistently going to Sweet 16s, like Tom Crean was doing, and I'll be the first to admit, I was criticizing him too. When we're consistently going to Sweet 16s, you got to give that guy a chance to get to the Final Four. You got to give that guy a chance to get to the national championship game. Because as we've seen since Coach Crean has left, it's not even that easy getting to the Sweet 16. These unrealistic expectations for how these players are supposed to behave, how they're supposed to look, how they're supposed to talk. Basketball has changed. Hip hop culture is all inside of basketball. There's a specific demographic in this country where basketball is elevated more so than any other demographic. And if you want elite talent, you have to have something that attracts that demographic. And they have to be welcome. So when they make mistakes off the court, you can't go on Twitter and act like you're talking about a political candidate, because other parents see that. Other recruits see that. Other people in the transfer portal see that. And parents don't want their sons going through that. And the players don't want to go through that, especially go through that with a mediocre program that ain't been to a Final Four in 20 years and ain't won a national championship in 40 and ain't even got no dope gear. We ain't who we used to be. There's this upper echelon of college basketball teams. We in the middle. Right now, when it comes to recruits, we right there with Clemson. We right there with Florida State. We right there with a Tennessee. And I would even say some of them are a little bit more ahead of us because they've been to more Sweet 16s than we have. They've gone deeper in the tournament. But you think I'm joking? Go ask recruits. Go ask elite players. Don't ask the kid who is a 2-star or 3-star in Tipton, Indiana, and his best offer is IU. Don't ask him. Ask the McDonald's All-American. Was Indiana even an option? Indiana. That's like saying Holy Cross to Calbert Chaney in the 90s. Absolutely, they had no chance of getting him. We have to temper our expectations if we want to see our alma mater raise banner number 6. I'm out the pond. Y'all stay true.
Easter Sunday, gotta call. My uncle's card and hit a wall. I didn't believe it, I still had sleep and crust on my eyes was still on. My cousin Nikki said it's all bad. She the law school grad, she done played it.